So I'd like to talk to you about the Warriors. That's you're going to be covering more than the Warriors for us, but this is your area of expertise, which is important because it still remains one of the most relevant teams, one of the highest interest teams. However, as has been repeated routinely for the last 2.5 weeks now, I guess 3 weeks, the Warriors have not made a move in this offseason yet. It is not for lack of lining things up and trying. So I think as we're recording this on July 23rd, maybe there will have been a move by July 25th. We can't see the future, but Slater, what are we to make of the Warriors offseason thus far?
It's not that surprising. Maybe you thought they might chip in a minimum or two, or announce an agreement without an official press release, which means it's been signed. But their big ticket item was Jonathan Kuminga. There was a lot of signs leading up to his free agency that it could drag because of the frozen restricted free agent market, which, by the way, is not just the Jonathan Kuminga thing. I think we all know. But there's a lot of scar tissue in the relationship. There's a lot of dynamics at play. There's a lot of CBA mechanisms and reasons that we are sitting here on July 23rd, and there's been somewhat movement. There's I would categorize the Warriors this week, and we are talking on Wednesday. Again, people may not be listening until Friday, but I would categorize the Warriors this week as more motivated to get something done with Jonathan Kuminga and attempting to move the ball down the road a little bit. And I've always felt that the most likely scenario was a Kuminga reunion for various reasons. But it's still stagnant July 23rd for various reasons too that go back. It really goes back 4 years. I mean, it's a 4-year story with Kuminga, and I don't know how deeply you want to get into it, but that's why they're stagnant, because of Jonathan Kuminga's situation.
Yeah, you authored many stories about this rocky relationship for The Athletic over the years. Some of them were co-authored with our colleague again, the ESPN Shams Charania, where, I mean, there was sort of a legendary story where Kuminga was quoted. Were you on that story with Shams?
Yeah. There was two. So you're talking, I already know the one you're talking about. Yeah. This would have been his third season when he was, he had a really good third season if you look at it statistically. And there was a brutal home loss on the front end of a back-to-back to the Denver Nuggets, which will most be remembered from, remember Jokic hits like a 40-foot banker or something.
Oh my God, it was legendary. Yeah,
well, in that game, Kuminga played like 18 minutes, and he'd been playing well, and he had played well in his 18 minutes, but Kerr didn't go back to him. And it was a buildup of frustration of him not breaking through, of him, feeling the career moment, feeling his game getting to a level where he was waiting for a breakthrough. And that was a very criticizable decision that particular night by Kerr. And in the middle of the back-to-back, me and Shams dropped the story where, it was basically Kuminga losing faith in Steve Kerr.
He was quoted. Was he quoted?
It was. So he was quoted the next night about it because, again, front end of a back-to-back. They then play the next night. Kuminga plays like a career high in minutes. He's awesome. They beat the Raptors.
I remember.
And then post-game, he gets into great detail about how him and Steve had a meeting that morning and like kind of discussed their, I guess lack of communication at times. And it almost 24 hours later was viewed as like, hey, maybe this is a positive. And again, he actually finished that season, at least regular season, decently. But that's like one chapter of about 19 in this saga.
We don't have to go chapter and verse, but long story short, Kuminga and Steve Kerr have had a rocky relationship. And I don't know if he was the centerpiece of the two timelines, he and James Wiseman, but he certainly was a big cornerstone of the two timelines, and it hasn't worked out. And it seems, if I could say this broadly, and if I'm over generalizing, knock me back into line. When the Warriors have their best players out there, Kuminga doesn't necessarily seem to thrive. But when he gets a bigger role and the ball in his hands more, he tends to thrive, which is why a lot of people, including, I guess, Mr. Kuminga himself, might have seen a future outside of Golden State. But it hasn't worked out for various reasons, largely because restricted free agency is a B word. And that's the world he's living in right now.
Yeah. And he has had moments with the full cast, which has changed over his 4 years, where he has, had huge stretches, 6 weeks where he's averaging 18, 19, 20 on good volume. And But, I will say typically it's like, hey, during Draymond's suspension, the longer suspension was one of his real bust-out moments. During Andrew Wiggins' hiatus, everybody can probably remember Andrew Wiggins, or it was Kuminga's second year, missed basically from the All-Star break to the end of the season. And you go back, and this is Kuminga's second season. He was a massive rotation piece that helped drag them to the 6th seed right at the end. And then Andrew Wiggins showed up on the doorstep right before the playoffs, and he was basically pulled from the rotation. And when you trace some of Kuminga's frustrations, it is because there have been moments where he's felt like he has broken through. He has proved to Steve Kerr and the decision makers that it is time to maybe anoint him ready to be an every night guaranteed rotation player. And there just hasn't been as much of a trust and belief and backing, call it immature, for a young player. But I think that often leads to his, bad transition defense, which can frustrate Kerr, lack of, physical rebounding, nights where he's kind of jogging up and down the floor and floating to the corner because when he doesn't feel that backing, has a mindset of like, all right, y'all just want me to, get out here and, not make a mistake because you're going to pull me if I make a mistake. So let me float to the corner. And again, I think that showed itself again at the end of his 4th season where they put him, in my opinion, in a very tough spot during the Rocket series. After pulling him, there was a couple times they had to plug him in, right? Remember, Jimmy Butler misses Game 3 at home, and they start him after keeping him out of the rotation. He played 11 minutes. He played hard. He made some mistakes. He'd been on ice. And then Game 7, remember, they lose the 3-1 lead. It's 3-3. He had a couple bad moments in Game 7, but that was like a really kind of difficult environment to be thrown in. And, with Jimmy Butler there, which goes back to your earlier point about like the full cast, particularly the Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry, Draymond Green full cast, it is kind of a misfit. But he would flip it, and you can flip the mindset where it goes, okay, Steph Curry tweaks the hamstring, and all the guys that you could say the Guy Santoses of the world who might play better as a 4th or 5th guy in the lineup and might, help get a hustle rebound and get back in transition and do that type of stuff. Well, guess what? When Steph Curry strains a hamstring, you can't go, hey, all right, take the ball, take Naz Reid off the dribble, score 20 tonight. Right. And it's like, well, that's valuable. And that will be valuable next season, won't it? I mean, like, let's say Al Horford is in tow, and clearly that's the Warriors' plan. We'll see if it's executed. But that would make 4 of their starters 35, 35, 37, 39. Al Horford doesn't play back-to-backs. We know some of the injury and the I don't want to say coasting that some of the other stars do, but like, you throttle up and throttle back during the regular season. They're going to need scoring. They're going to need athleticism. They're going to need pop during an 82-game regular season. And I think lost in a lot of what's going on right now with Kuminga is people aren't talking about how much I believe in a lot of people, including some in the Warriors, front office, even some in the team believe he is needed at times. Will he be potentially minimized and benched in Game 5, Game 6 of the second round? Sure. That could, again, it could happen. Steve Kerr, gets to a moment where he just needs like defensive hustle and this, and he goes away from him. But guess what? Jimmy Butler misses 2 weeks next season. You need to score. You need a 5th-year, 6'7" wing who's going to go to the rim, because there's other flaws on their roster that very much show themselves when one of their scorers is out.
They've also tried to trade him a couple of times that I'm aware of. They tried to trade him. They tried to trade him for Kevin Durant midway through this last season. They tried to trade him for Paul George last summer when they ended up not, the Clippers basically wouldn't agree to the trade. God knows how many other times he's been in discussions, but like at least two times they tried to trade him for a star player. I'm sure there were discussions with him and Jimmy Butler. He ended up not being in that deal. Obviously, ended up being Wiggins, the big name in the deal.
The Durant near trade. This deadline's very important here because you go back to last summer, and there's a lot of even angst now, I'd say, about like he was extension eligible last summer, right? And it doesn't get done. Part of the reason it doesn't get done, and sure, the way it's been put to me is there was never any offers on the table. There was some dancing around of like,
word, as the word offer is a tough word for media to use, whether it's trade or contract or, offering a job to a head coach. The word offer is a difficult word. I think in I know, like with my editors, they'll be like, well, didn't they offer it? I'm like, well, hold on. Just be careful using the word offer, because when you use the word offer, you kind of got to defend it, and there's this language game that is played. So I understand what you're saying. Yes.
So what's important there, though, is part of the reason that the Warriors were hesitant to extend Kuminga last summer. And, while, numbers were discussed, and I think Jalen Johnson getting 5 years, 150 gave a target that obviously Kuminga and their his representation, they had ambitious, thoughts about what it could be. I'm of the belief, and I've been told, that they would have taken 5 for 150 if it was ever on the table. It wasn't on the table. And part of the reason the Warriors didn't necessarily want to put an offer on the table and never actually did put a firm, sign on the dotted line type offer on the table is because it would have poison pilled his contract. And they were very much in flexibility mode because they wanted to be able to trade him. And if you sign him to that deal, he's nearly impossible to trade last season. And as you mentioned, they almost traded him for Kevin Durant, which, by the way, I think the Warriors, you could argue whether it's better that they got Butler or Durant, but I'll tell you where Jonathan Kuminga wouldn't mind being right now, an extended member of the Phoenix Suns, but
which was probably their plan if they had gotten that deal done. And let me just say that when it comes to poison pill, just so our listeners know what that is, because it's a little bit of an obscure reference.
Yeah.
If you have signed a contract, if you're in your rookie deal, and you're in your third year, you're going into your fourth year, and you sign a contract, you become much harder to trade. I'm not going to get into the chapter and verse of it because I'm afraid I'll make a mistake and then I'll have to retract something, and Bobby Marks will have to answer for me. But you become harder to trade. But by the way, isn't that also an issue for this year? Not so much the poison pill, but
base year compensation, another terrific CBA term that everyone has to go to their dictionary and look up.
Yeah, but just in general, even if they sign him, I think there's a possibility, as they're negotiating, I'm not saying they would announce this, but as they're negotiating, they're thinking, we want to sign to a contract that we might be able to trade.
I feel comfortable saying both sides, as they're working through this right now, are discussing the idea of having, tradable contracts with the understanding that if you have to have him to at least January 15th, which you would if you signed the contract, he could bust out and be a 22 point per game scorer that they don't want to trade. Situations changed in the league, as and certainly situations can change into January. But I think both sides are comfortable if a deal is eventually done, which I think the qualifying offer's on the table. I think
which is $8 million, right?
Yeah, 7.9. I think a drawn out process that ends several ways is still on the table, but if a compromise contract, I've been calling it, happens, that is definitely going to be with the understanding that it possibly could get traded come January.
Yeah. So, and if you take just for the listeners, if you take the qualifying offer, it means that you get a no trade clause automatically,